about it, and I know I'll sleep well tonight. Um, Let me just say a little bit about the Library of Congress and the Poetry and Literature Center before we start. We are home to the Poet Laureate Consultant in Poetry. Our most recent Poet Laureate, Charles Wright, just finished his appointment as the 20th Poet Laureate. We also do events, readings, lectures, symposia, stuff like that throughout the year. A few off-site, but mostly up the street at the libraries, Jefferson, Madison buildings. To find out more about those events, you can go to our website, which is www.loc.gov/poetry. And now I'm very excited to introduce Mary Ruefle, who will conclude our 2015 spring season of Life of a Poet. She is the author of 10 books of poetry, including selected poems, winner of the William Carlos Williams Award from my old home, the Poetry Society of America. She has also published Madness, Rack and Honey, Collected Lectures, which was a finalist for the National Book Critics Circle Award in Criticism, and has published a book of prose and a comic book. She is an erasure artist, too, whose treatments of 19th century texts have been exhibited in museums and galleries and published in the book A Little White Shadow. Her honors include the Robert Creeley Award, an award in literature from the American Academy of Arts and Letters, a Whiting Award, and fellowships from the Guggenheim Foundation and from the National Endowment for the Arts. Do we have anybody from the NEA here tonight? No. Oh, those NEA people. They're missing out. She lives in Bennington, Vermont, and she teaches intermittently at the MFA program at Vermont College, and will do so this summer. So Ron wrote a wonderful intro about this event and about Mary in the Washington Post this week. If you haven't read it, you should go back after this event and check it out. He talks about, in that intro, which is sort of a primer, he talks about Mary's strikingly original poetry, which he says is, quote, marked by flashes of sorrow and wit, end quote. He also says her poems contain echoes of Emily Dickinson, which makes intuitive sense to me. I first learned of Mary's poetry and heard her read when I was a graduate student up in Amherst, Massachusetts, which is the kind of place that can inspire poetry, arguably as much, if not more, than anywhere else. The concision, the imaginative charge, the beautiful directness and playfulness. This is how both Emily and Mary win us over in poem after poem. But Mary's ability to move among genres and even art forms makes her an inspiring figure in a different way. To me, Mary is a reminder of the essential nature of artistic practice. It allows for a kind of freedom and a kind of discovery that no other practice can offer. I am so lucky to know her and to know her work, and I'm delighted we will all have the opportunity to spend the next hour or so learning about both. So please join me in welcoming Mary Ruefle.
Thank you, Rob, and thank you for coming. It's such a pleasure to have you here.
Thank you.
It's been a pleasure to read your work.
Honored to be here.
This is the biggest crowd we've had. Yeah. So thank you all very much for coming, too. You once told an interviewer, I didn't grow up anywhere. What did you mean by that? You said, I grew up without a singular home.
My father was in the military, and we moved every year, every 2 years. The longest we ever lived anywhere was 3 years. But since I said that, I have heard an even more wonderful answer, which I would outright steal from the poet D.A. Powell, who said, where did you grow up? He said, I'll tell you when it happens.
In a poem called The Review, you said, all my life I've felt the heavy hand of the poet making connections, which is a shame because my life did have its moments of grace and strength.
I said that?
You did. Did you?
Was it in a poem?
It was in a poem among the...
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
When did you really feel that calling as a poet? Wasn't always, surely.
Subconsciously or unconsciously, I believe when I was a child.
Was it a calling, like a religious feeling, an impulse?
I think that becoming a poet is a vocation that you don't choose, it chooses you. And you feel it. Instead of looking at all the possible vocations in the world and choosing among them,
Lawyer, doctor, poet.
you feel it inside yourself. And inside yourself is a voice telling you, this is what makes me happy. This is what I want to do. In the beginning, it doesn't say this is what I should be doing, but this is what I want to do. Then I think after a certain period of time, it starts to say this is what I should be doing. And eventually, the voice begins to say, this is why I was put on earth. And that may sound very prideful or inflated, but it is a definition of faith to believe that.
Were you encouraged?
No, I was never encouraged at all. No, I was not. I was not born into...
You can understand why. I mean, it's an impractical career choice.
Yes, my parents were never happy with my career choice. Although I later, after they died, found out that they were secretly proud. They never heard me read, and they never read my books.
Why?
But they bought my books, and they had them displayed in the living room in a pile. My father didn't like poetry. If you don't like poetry, why should you? You don't have to read it. My mother, I think, read the books looking for something she might recognize, a place name or a person's name, and found it once. And that's the only time she ever responded to anything I wrote. She said, oh, you mentioned, the street or something. But that's okay. I mean, it means I had to find my own way. And I think I found my own way in books. I think we become writers in one of two ways. Either we're born into a family that loves the arts and encourages them and introduces every child from birth to their cultural heritage and to all the cultures in the world, creative cultures the world over. And as a child, you're very, very fortunate if you have parents who constantly read great books to you and take you to museums and help you fall in love with painting and music. Those of us who didn't have that can't really complain, because what happened in my case, and from my discussions with other people, many other cases, is you feel very lonely and weird, and you feel you were born into the wrong family, and you go into your room, if you're lucky enough to have one. I had a room of my own after a certain age, and close the door and read. And in a book, I said, oh, someone else is lonely too. And that was it. I mean, then they became my friends, and they became my family. And my closest friends growing up, I mean, I had real, fleshy human friends.
Right.
But the kinds of friends you make in books when you're a lonely child, it's like nothing else. And they've remained my friends my whole life. I still love, the books that you might read as a child. The Wind in the Willows is one of my all-time favorite books, or Robert Louis Stevenson, or who. It's not just, I love children's literature. And then eventually one day you're reading Salinger, and then you're reading Tolstoy, and then you're reading, Gertrude Stein, and so it goes. And
remember these self-deprecating lines? My inability to express myself is astounding.
Yes, I still feel that way.
I don't have that impression.
I think we all feel that way.
Yeah. It is not curious or even faintly interesting, but like some fathomless sum, a number, the sum of equally fathomless numbers, each one the sole representative of an infinite, ever-ripening infinity that will never reach the weight required by the sun to fall. Was that, are you being funny there? Is that really the way you feel, or is it just kind of a comic expression of exasperation?
That's a good and interesting question. I think when I wrote that particular poem, I really was feeling that. But in another poem, when I say such an outlandish thing, it might be I was being outlandish. But I think I was feeling that at the time.
And
Sometimes when I get carried away, it's hard. Sometimes when I get carried away in a poem, it's an expression of my innermost being, which is being swept away. And then sometimes I'm very conscious of it and I'm doing it on purpose and having fun.
Yes.
That both can happen.
Yes. You once told an interviewer, I can't gauge my work at all.
Oh,
How can that be?
That is true.
How can that be? How can you know when a poem's done or when you should send it in or share it or sell it?
I know when a poem's done, but I meant gauging the quality of a poem. I know when a poem's done. A poem is done when it stops bothering me. That's my definition of doneness, when it stops bothering me. If I write a poem and I spend days, and this happens I spend days walking around with those lines that are not right,
Yes.
it's not done. But gauging my work, the poems that I've written that I love, like nobody pays any attention to or has any interest in. They're not published, or my editor rejects them from books and things. And I think they're like, and then the poems that I'm like, that's ridiculous. Everyone likes them. I don't know.
Would you read a poem for us?
Sure, I'd be happy to.
It's his first poem in your latest book.
Oh, saga. Yeah. Everything that ever happened to me is just hanging, crushed and sparkling in the air, waiting to happen to you. Everything that ever happened to me happened to somebody else first. I would give you an example, but they are all invisible, or off gallivanting around the globe. Not here when I need them, now that I need them, if I ever did, which I doubt. Being particular has its problems. In particular, there is a rift through everything. There is a rift running the length of Iceland, and so a rift runs through every family, and between families, a feud. It's called a saga. Rifts and sagas fill the air, and beautiful old women sing of them. So the air is filled with music and the smell of berries and apples and shouting when a gun goes off and crying in closed rooms. Faces, who needs them? Eating the blood of oranges, I in my alcove could use one. Abbas and Ammas, come out of your huts, travel halfway around the world, inspect my secret bank account of joy. My face is a jar of honey you can look through. You can see everything is muted, so terribly muted. Who could ever speak of it, sealed and held up for all?
Thank you. It's lovely. You published a collection of your lectures called Madness, Rack, and Honey. It's a great, great collection. I hope all of you get a copy. You write in there, I don't think I really have anything to say about poetry, which is not true at all, by the way, other than remarking that it's a wandering little drift of unidentified sound. And trying to say more reminds me of following the sound of a thrush into the woods on a summer's eve. If you persist in following the thrush, it will only recede deeper and deeper into the woods. You'll never actually see the thrush. The hermit thrush is especially shy. But I suppose listening is a kind of knowledge, or as close as one can come. Now, I thought you were kidding with that metaphor, but as I read your work, I did feel like I was chasing the thrush for the last few days. I could hear it, I thought it was beautiful, but I couldn't always see it. There were poems of yours that affected me, and I had no idea why. Do you feel that way sometimes?
Yes, I feel that way every time I read a poem I love.
You try and analyze it, but somehow the analysis seems inadequate or even irrelevant to the emotional effect of a poem. The simplicity of your language, for instance, completely belies the complexity of what you're doing, which I think is the real genius of your work. In one of your poems, you call poetry a sphinx in a sandstorm.
Oh.
It's great.
It can be that. When I was younger, I read all sorts of things that went right over my head. But I loved them. I knew that I loved them, even if I didn't understand them. And that's part of what keeps a person reading, I think.
Yes.
I mean, now I am older and I can understand a lot more of what I read.
Right.
But
Like this poem, Kiss of the Sun.
oh, okay. Yeah. Kiss of the Sun. If, as they say, poetry is a sign of something among people, then let this be prearranged now between us while we are still peoples. That at the end of time, which is also the end of poetry and wheat and evil and insects and love, when the entire human race gathers in the flesh, reconstituted down to the infant's tiniest fold and littlest nail, I will be standing at the edge of that fathomless crowd with an orange for you, reconstituted down to its innermost seed, protected by white thread, in case you are thirsty, which does not at this time seem like such a wild guess. And though there will be no poetry between us then, at the end of time, the geese all gone with the seas, I hope you will take it. And remember, on earth, I did not know how to touch it. It was all so raw. And if by chance there is no edge to the crowd or anything else so that I am of it, I will take the orange and toss it as high as I can.
That's one of those poems. It's beautiful, it's affecting, and I'm not always entirely sure what's going on.
Well, when you listen to music, you're also not entirely, in music and poetry, of course, share ancestors and they're related. I believe that if a poem gives you pleasure, you have understood it. And if you're a student and you're taking an exam and your teacher asks you to explicate the poem, I want you to write, "This poem gave me pleasure, therefore I understood it and have nothing else to say." And if your teacher gives you problems, give them my phone number and have them call me.
In one of your poems, you say one pair of eyes is simply not enough. And listening and looking are the central activities of your poems. Do you agree with that?
I totally agree with that. Paying attention to,
Yes, they're all about what I get the sense that you think poetry is an act of extreme and inspired attention.
Yes, I do. I do.
You write in one of your poems, "They noticed, you see, that I was a noticing kind of person." In another poem you say, "Poetry is a tourist. It wears cameras around its neck and takes nice pictures of deadly things."
It's true.
In a poem called "The Lake Gulls in April" includes these lines, "Every time you are amazed, you are a poet, amazed at exactly the right thing." That's the key, looking.
I think all poets are noticers and pay attention, but we pay attention to different things, hence the wide variety of poetic concerns and subjects and styles. Some people pay attention to the evolution of their past. And some people pay attention to language, always a great thing to pay attention to. And some people pay attention to what they see, like a flower, to nature, or if they live, or urban things in urban. You know, and you pay attention to different things.
Your poems make us pay more attention, I think. They sort of train us to pay attention.
Well, that's the greatest compliment that anyone could give another person, to pay more attention to the world around you.
And sometimes it's very ordinary things. In one of your poems,
Oh.
This line struck me. "The elaborate stillness of a hard-boiled egg wrapped in wax paper at the bottom of a lunch pail."
Hard-boiled eggs. Have you ever really looked at a hard-boiled egg? And they have that sheen.
The elaborate stillness.
And then Bob Dylan has that great line, speaking of poetry, in which it's a song he's totally ripping off the Scottish poet Robbie Burns. It's My Heart's in the Highland. And he walks into a restaurant and he compares the waitress's long legs to a shiny hard-boiled egg. I don't know, that just popped into my mind. You said hard-boiled egg, and I said they're amazing, and then I thought of that line.
That's good.
I mean, hard-boiled eggs, they're everywhere. They're everywhere. Once you start thinking about them, you see them everywhere.
That poem ends, by the way, so you see it all, everything, so terribly clear. Little sticky notes here. Here's a poem about looking and seeing. I mean, all your poems are, but that one struck me in particular.
Oh, it's early. This is my first book. Wow, okay. I haven't read this in 40 years. Street. 1. It begins in the window and is broken by the elm with a root for drinking. Everything is alive in a glass. The woman in a clear plastic coat, cellophane over the bread in her bag. Through a windshield, I can see her face half cut by a wiper. There, a man stands in a gutter of water, shifts in the drunkenness of leaves. Like his feet, he has taken a single unnecessary step. From here on out, things will be different. His heart, an engine, a small yellow sun that appears to be stopping traffic. 2. It is painful to look at the snowman, his eye sockets shoved with coal. He is melting like white bread in the rain. Only the luster of his eyes will be left, hard in the tall grass. Odd that the deadly event seemed to be sagging with birth, unable to sleep or let go. Or perhaps it is everything happening at once. A black coat taking with it the stock-still man inside. It is a dangerous thing to be walking without looking up. And a chair is a terrible thing, sitting next to a third-story window. Beautiful, though, that the dead do not have to look both ways. It's a really early poem. This dates from about 1975. I haven't read it in ages. And I see all sorts of interesting things in it that I did then, like consistently, that I would never do now.
Interesting.
But that was, yeah. I was in an apartment, and it was on the third story of a building, and I had a chair right next to the window, and I would sit and just look out the window. Thank you for that.
Sure, thank you. You don't have a computer, I understand?
No, I don't.
Why not?
I just don't have any time, Bruce.
So many great cat videos you're missing.
I have an iPad, and I do have a favorite YouTube video. It's about the only thing I like on the computer. It's called Pet Penguin in Japan. So if you haven't looked up Pet Penguin in Japan,
I have not.
it is an absolute cure for depression. It works every time. I don't have a computer, not because I have anything against them at all, but because I myself, personally, for my own reasons, it has to do with attention. We live in a culture that more and more tells us demands what we pay attention to. That we should pay attention to, all these things. I reserve the right to choose what I pay attention to, and I choose not to pay attention to the world online. It hurts me in many ways because all of literature has moved online. I'm well aware of that. And, I suffer from that a little bit, but I have time to look out the window and, open the fridge and check out the hard-boiled eggs and all sorts of things like that. It's a personal choice of attention. I do have an iPad. It's not hooked up to a machine or anything. I couldn't print anything out, but I have experienced that world.
I thought it had something to do with wanting not to be distracted.
Yeah,
as I read your work. You say in one of your poems, "I have done nothing for long periods of time and learned to do it well."
Yeah.
And I love this line, "Ducks never acquire any knowledge because they never shut up."
That's true. Quack, 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 quack. I do. I love ducks too, and squirrels and animals. And
You lived in Vermont a long time.
yeah, I moved there in 1971.
40 years?
Yeah, I've been there more or less ever since, except I have been away to live in other states for a year at a time. I've been away for a year at a time. I was 5 years in Massachusetts, and then I've been many other places for a year. But it's home.
And nature is the primary subject of your work.
Well, it was, but now I live, for years, many of these books were written, I was very, very fortunate, and I lived on a lot of wilderness. Yes. But those days are over, and I now live in a really, really bad neighborhood, in a depressed mill town, like right downtown in subsidized housing. And at first I thought, oh, this is going to be depressing. And I feel a great sense of solidarity now with the neighborhood. And I love, I've been there 12 years now, and I love slowly observing the acute, insane suffering of the teenagers and the older people and the younger people and the kids and the adults, and I have friends who, you know, have a kind of idyllic setting, and they go, why does she live there? Yes. Why does she live there? And I've realized I can't express it. Again, my inability to be articulate about where I live and my love of it. Mm-hmm. But I do feel now a defensive solidarity with the stratum that I live among, the social stratum that I live among. Yeah.
This is new, recent or relatively new.
No, 12 years I've been
12 years,
there,
okay.
But all before that, I was sort of caretaker for an estate with, you know, apple orchards and deer and all of that.
And those were the subjects of your poems.
Yeah, for the
Primarily,
most part.
not
You see, well, you
Yeah.
see a lot of that
Right.
in them.
What did it represent to you? Did it represent something else, or was it just what it was, just nature as nature?
Well, nature's not just nature, it's a planet moving through outer space, and we are sharing that planet with plants and animals. Yes. So that's the main picture we have to keep in our minds at all time. Right now, we are in outer space. We are in outer space, literally. We are on a ball of earth in the middle of endlessness. Nobody knows where it ends or how big it is. They only know it's a lot bigger than they thought. And we're in the middle. Well, we can't say middle, right? Because
could be on the edge.
We could be on the edge, you know. So literally, this is our position. We are in outer space. It's the given. You don't have to do anything weird or say anything weird to be in outer space. You are in outer space. And we are sharing this space with plants and animals. If you wake up every morning and remind yourself of that, today will be pretty interesting.
Do not disturb.
Oh yeah.
Remember these little guys?
I remember these. Do not disturb. In a milk-white mist in the middle of the wood, there are 2 dead vowels. The vowels in the wood are cared for by birds who cover them in strawberry leaves. And in the winter, when the bodies are mounded with snow, owls keep a vigil from a nearby branch by the light of the moon. Poor vowels in the wood, poor vowels in the wood. They can't remember the vows in the wood when they did woo. How before they were dead, they lay on their backs and looked at the clouds, speaking softly to one another for hours. That poem is a riff on an old children's verse, English children's verse, Babes in the Wood, which I kind of fell in love with and sort of riffed. I turned the children into vowels. I don't know. Babes in the Wood. Which one?
I can't read the
This one.
Yes.
Intermittence. The anxiety of spring will come, and the birds build nests out of circular ideas. Slender of means, sparing of words, the rain will fall. The sun will shine and make things certain. These things will remain a mystery. Next, no contra from anywhere, and the air be seriously entangled. That was a spring poem. It's hard when you live in the country, not, you have spring, every spring you're at a spring poem, every fall. You can't help yourself.
Now, not to embarrass you, but the Emily Dickinson comparison does come up again and again in writing about you, and I felt it as I read your poems too. The use of nature, the wit, the strange, paradoxical phrase, and you're a great student of Emily Dickinson, I understand.
Student of, I love Emily Dickinson and read her, but I never studied her in school. I don't, but.
What do you think about the comparison?
Three things. One, I think the comparison began, I could be wrong, but it might have begun because I had a reputation for extreme reclusiveness. And then it morphed into, which is one thing, right? And then it morphed into the work. And I was like, that's entirely inappropriate. It's inappropriate, and it's entirely untrue. Actually, I'm more reclusive than she was. I'm jumping back. No, because she lived with her sister and her mother and her father. And I no longer, no, I guess I still live alone. Well, I lived alone my whole life till recently. Okay. And she never lived alone a day in her life. So there was that reclusive, that reputation. And then it got the work, which I felt was embarrassing and inappropriate and simply not true. I mean, I know her work, and not true. And then my third take on it is deep inside of myself, the thrill bell goes off. I think all those other things, and the thrill bell is always there. I'm not going to lie.
Well, I heard it again and again in your work. I didn't know you were a recluse, and not all reclusive women are like Emily Dickinson.
That's for sure.
Yeah. Ordinary words, extraordinary lines. There are such distinctive moments in your poetry when you self-consciously use very ordinary language. In a beautiful poem about pain, for instance, you write, "It is a mistake to hope, but not a biggie." Not a biggie? Is she quoting T.S. Eliot there? or sometimes you lay some cliche or nursery rhyme, as in, "Why am I not a good kisser?" You say, "A sailor went to sea in me, to see what he could see in me." One of your poems begins, "Starlight, star bright, first star I see tonight, I wish I may, I wish I might have tranquility of mind in sight." What are you doing in moments like that?
I was wishing on a star on that one.
No, I mean rhetorically. What are you doing by taking this either cliche language or worn language or the language of a nursery rhyme and weaving them into your own language?
I love cliches if they're put in a context where they become new or fresh again. So I'm not afraid of using cliches. I think English idioms are amazing. Well, idioms in any language. And so I'm very fond of idioms. And nursery rhyme and archaic texts, I want to reinvent that stuff. I don't want it to be lost. When I was a little girl, we played patty cake, and it was a sailor went to sea to see what he. A lot of girls today don't know what that is, but I grew up singing that, and I used it in that poem. I mean, I didn't think consciously I'm going to use this in a poem. While I was writing the poem, for whatever reason, it popped into my head and I incorporated it. Right. I will incorporate in a poem anything that pops into my head while I'm writing. And so that showed up. And another thing, and I'm not only speaking for myself, because many, many posters, is I will take anything figurative literally and anything literal figuratively, which is almost a definition of being a poet. I mean, if you, you hear things wrong, it's a twist.
Right,
Yeah.
it makes it alive to us.
Yeah.
There's a
Yeah.
lot of humor in your lectures, and there's humor in your poetry too. You've got a very mordant sense of humor. It can be wickedly dark too. You've written possibly the greatest poem about middle school I've ever read. I want you to read this. You know the one I'm talking about, maybe? It's called Middle School.
Middle school. I went to Cesar Pavese Middle School. The gymnasium was a chapel dedicated to loneliness, and no one played games. There was a stained glass window over the principal's desk, and innumerable birds flew against it, reciting Shelley with all their might, but it was bulletproof, and besides, our leaders were never immortal. The classrooms were modeled after motel rooms, replete with stains, and in remedial cases, saucers of milk on the floor for innumerable cats or kittens, depending on the time of year. In them, we were expected to examine ourselves and pass. The principal himself once jumped off the roof at noon to show us school spirit. Our mascot was Twist Tie Man. Our team, the Bitter Herbs. Our club, the Reconsiderers. It was an honor to have gone, though a tad strict in retrospect. You have probably heard that we all became janitors, sitting in basements next to boilers, reading cheap paperback books of Italian poetry, and never sweep a thing. Yet the world runs fine.
So many middle schools. There is this constant tension in your poetry, I think, between happiness and sorrow, joy and despair, often in the same poem, sometimes in the same line, sometimes for comic effect. It's a very painful thing to part company with what torments you. A typical witty line, or this line here. Life is the sweetest thing in this world. When you fall, it's awful. Spend the first half of your life acquiring feelings. Spend the last half trying to lose them, and the spooky music of failure will haunt you all your days. That's really dark.
What's the title of that poem? Says.
Nugets, is that?
Oh yeah.
Toward the correction of youthful ignorance, you write, I think they are right after all. There's no love in this world, but it's a beautiful place. In Fireworks, you write, the world was designed and built to overwhelm and astonish, which makes it hard to live.
It does.
What is this? Is this melancholy? Depression?
Well, I have suffered from depression in my life, but I don't think that's it. I think, okay. Basically what I'm trying to say is this. You know, life is not easy. It's just not. I mean, don't terrible things happen? Isn't it just awful sometimes? Rejection, failure, accident, illness, death, poverty. I mean, do I have to go on? I mean, don't things break down? Don't you have bad days? But there's all that stuff and you have to deal with it. I mean, you have to sign leases and go get rabies shots for your dogs and, you know, it's 80% maintenance. We run errands and it consumes us. And I think all of us are really sitting around saying, everyone else has all this free time, I'm the only one, you know, which is not true. But it's all that. And then great person. But you're alive. And you possess the greatest gift on earth, which is consciousness. And it's such a gift. That's always going to be joy, pure joy, joy. So there's the joy of just being alive, and then there's the terrible stuff that happens, you know. So you survived the accident, but you lost a leg. You know, I mean, it's mind-boggling. I don't know, yeah. Maybe that wasn't articulate enough. Just.
Like a daffodil.
Like a daffodil.
Such an anodyne title.
Where did I get that title from? Is it in the poem?
It's paradox.
Oh. Like a daffodil. What went on when I suddenly understood him? Yellow with age and disillusioned with the despair that had fired his student days. I unfolded a map of the city, knowing it would never fit in my pocket again. In the very depths of myself, I dug a grave. No path leads to it. And there I planted every bulb I ever felt for him. I had the sudden urge to eat postcards of famous paintings. I had a perfectly lucid definition of wine, blue marble powdered down to sea. I had the belief it all comes down to one untranslatable word in Parmenides. He was pained to see me with no other career than my emotions about things. Yet I was continually borne forward by his sense of runes. I wandered like a flashlight through every room. I spotted clocks everywhere, but each one told a different hour. My accurate heart, these rough chimes, and our dead bodies. These three things occupied my mind. And joy, and joy, and joy. I was in love. And it was a big mistake. Huge, bad news. But one day it occurred to me, you know, it's the same as the other stuff. If you ever, some of you who are younger, if you ever find yourself in that situation, because you often have to pass through it, you know. You see, it's the same thing I was saying before. You know, there's nothing worse than a bad love relationship. And yet your power to love, the human capacity for that kind of passion is never anything but pure joy. Your capacity to love is a wondrous thing. So instead of being awestruck by the dumb lover, be awestruck by your own capacity to love the person that's being a jerk.
It's that closing line. That closing line
Yeah.
that so surprises and so makes the poem become electric. At the very darkest point of the poem, and joy, and joy, and joy. It's a very daring thing. There is a lot of loneliness in your poems. In a poem called Blue, you refer to the leopard of solitude.
Oh,
Yeah,
whoa.
that's great, isn't it? Yeah. That'll be my band or my blog. I haven't decided.
Now I'm the pythoness of paprika.
In Replica, you write, "You've wasted another evening sitting with imaginary friends discussing the simplest possible arrangement of an iris." I want you to read a couple of your loneliness poems to us. One is called The Great Loneliness.
Oh, okay, I know that one. The Great Loneliness. By March, the hay bales were ripped open, exposed in the fields like bloated gray mice who died in December. I came upon them at dusk, and their attar lifted my spine until I felt like turning over an old leaf. So I walked on, a walking pitchfork. From every maple hung a bucket or two, collecting blood to be distributed across America so people could rise from their breakfast healthy, hoping to make a go of it again. Now, this is a riddled explanation, but I am a historian of pagan means and must walk 5 miles a day to cover the period I will call the Great Loneliness. And the name will stick so successfully that for years afterwards, children will complain at meals and on sunny days and in the autumn and at Easter that their parents are unnecessarily mute. And their parents will look down harshly upon the plates and beach towels and leaves and bunnies and say, "You don't know what you were talking about. You never lived through the great loneliness. And if you had, you would never speak." And the children will turn away and consider the words, or lack of them, and how one possible explanation might be that inside our bodies, skeletons grow at an increasingly secretive rate, though they never mention it, even amongst themselves.
And my hotel.
My hotel. My hotel darkened. The bed sobbed to itself. I sat naked on the bed reading the book of Job. He overcame them in the night and they were crushed. When I woke up, the book was already back in its drawer like a genie in its lamp. I looked out the window. The outskirts were gone. I wanted to say something, but it was very un-English. So I did something unheard of. I left the soap and the shampoo, the shoe mitt and shower cap and sewing kit behind. Without these things, how did I go on? Call me a deciduous person, the way sometimes a photograph falls down through a family and no one knows who it is. So my life without me was lived.
I thought I was so clever to notice this theme of loneliness in your work, and then I ran across a poem of yours called Q&A that includes this line: "We noticed you use the word lonely in many of your poems." The speaker says, "Why is that?" So, Ms. Ruefle, why is that?
You want me to read the poem? No. Wow, what's loneliness?
I mean, you obviously noticed
I'm
it.
I'm not. I'm
you noticed this.
incapable of being bored, and I'm incapable of being lonely.
Yes.
There is a difference, of course, between solitude and loneliness. I truly do not feel a weight of loneliness, but there was a period in my life when I did, and I think many of the intensest loneliness poems came out of a period when I was not in my right mind, and I truly was felt excruciatingly lonely. But that is certainly not the case, most of the time. I don't know. I was a lonely kid. I spent a lot of time alone in my room reading. Because, when you move around a lot, it takes a while to... Right. Yeah, I was a lonely kid, and...
At some point you noticed this in your poems, though. That's why you wrote this funny poem about it.
Yeah, well, I was on the radio and I was asked that.
Oh, and you put it into the poem.
I completely froze. I said, she said, what? I noticed the word loneliness in a lot of your poems. Why is that? I just kind of, I thought that was getting a little personal or something. and I wrote the poem a few days later.
Did that in some way exorcise the loneliness from you once you became self-conscious about it in your work? Not that your work is therapeutic, but...
It's so hard to talk about that because I know that it's everywhere in my poems, and yet I'm not a lonely person. People have always said to me, I have friends that tried to live alone and they can't do it. Mm-hmm. And I'm like, it's the easiest thing in the world. I don't know how you can live with another person. So there's that versus my emphasis on it in my work. And it's hard for me to articulate. Maybe it's just a kind of a French ennui or a Japanese melancholy or something. Yeah, I don't know. The only way to really get to the bottom of the question is I'd have to, it can't be done, I'd have to date the poems and look at the dates,
Right.
you know, and compare the dates with something. Yeah.
We're talking about these erasure poems of yours.
Oh, yeah.
Which I had never seen before. And I'm sorry you can't see them, and this is completely inadequate. But here's an example. This is a little book called The White Shadow. And she's taken a 19th century book, and she's whited out most of the words.
Yeah, the words are all missing.
Almost all the words are gone. Would you read? I've marked
I'd
three of
love
them here.
to. It's a joyful book. You can read the entire thing in 5 minutes straight. No one at the villa made me secretly think of children chasing butterflies. The flapping white dresses of the fish rising sharply against the sky. My ignorance was a refining influence. The view from the window stopped and said, "Here I lie day after day, and the only things I possess which can travel can go no farther." I think what will always linger longest in our memories of her, we never would any of us miss. Suffering would lay back on her pillows, exhausted with the intensity of hope.
Thank you. But hearing them is a totally different experience than seeing them on the page.
Yeah.
It's one of those art forms.
Because you have to, you can visually see the whiteout, and
They're fairly effective to hear, but they're not
no,
the same.
it's not the same. You have to. It's the hard thing with the erasure books is I've made 78 of them.
This is the only one you've published.
One is coming out next week, another one, but this was the first. It's an obsession, and it's me coming to terms with the fact I'm basically a failed visual artist, and so it's a way to incorporate. Anyway, I work on them every day of my life.
More than you write poetry.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah.
Isn't that odd?
Yeah, but it just happened. It's a ritual. It's a routine now.
Do you think of it as a creative process or a destructive process?
Totally creative.
But you're mostly
Totally
taking away
creative.
someone's words.
Well, I'm creating something new, and I don't choose famous people. You know, I don't erase poetry, first of all, and I don't erase the works of, I choose really obscure little books, with the exception of the Bible. But that, you know,
I've heard of that.
That's yeah, I've heard of that. But I've done the Gospels, but
You erased the Gospels?
yes, I did.
You and Thomas Jefferson?
Yes.
With your scissors?
Yeah, exactly. So, but the books are very much, you're absolutely right. It's a physical, one-of-a-kind experience of turning the pages and seeing on the page what's been taken away. So I don't read from them anymore. For a few years, I read out loud at readings, and then someone I trust came up and said, well, "What's the point? Why do you do that?" So I stopped.
Because you have to see it.
Yeah. They say otherwise it just turns into a bunch of punchlines or something, which is okay.
Is it analogous to the kind of constraint that someone with a rhyme scheme deals with, or someone working in a particular form where you really can only choose particular words?
You put your finger on it. This is this is how I explain it. I write in free verse, my poems.
Yes.
But the erasure to me might be, some people call it found poetry, which infuriates me. It's like, excuse me, I worked to get those, you know, I didn't find the text. I had to work at erasing text to create poetic text or interesting or funny text. It's a form. When I write a poem, I can choose from any word in the English language.
Right.
I can only use the words on the page. Now, occasionally I will cheat, and I will, if I need a word "the" in a certain place and it's not there, I have little transfer letters, you know, or I can cut it out of another book and glue it on. But for the most part, I can only choose from those words.
So you've got,
It's
what,
very
300
restrictive.
words?
It depends on the size of the book. I mean, they're all different, but it's a challenge.
Yes.
You can only choose from the words on the page. And obviously, choosing the, I'm very picky about the books. That helps. I mean, I won't, some people will say, oh, here, I think you'd like to erase this, and I can take one, you know, spend a minute looking at the text and going, not going to work.
Is it like a sculpture, you know, like I just carve away what isn't the tree, that kind of thing? Or how do you see it there on the page?
Oh, all the words rise up and they hover like a quarter inch above the page. It's like a field, and they're hovering. I don't actually read I don't read the page. I read the words, which is different. So I'm looking and I see all the words, and I go in and I pick a phrase or a word that's delicious that I really love. Like I might see the word spine, and I go, okay, I like that word, I can use spine. And then of course I can use the word pine, which is inside of it, because there are words inside of words. So even though there might be 100 or 150 words on a page, you also have all the words that are inside of words. So you learn to see that.
You're also limited by the order on the page, though.
Absolutely, you're limited by the order. You have to make some phrase out of the order. I love it. Oh, I love it so much. There's nothing like it on earth. I'm crazy about it.
And it's a completely different, is it a sort of, as you say, completely different than your free verse poetry?
Yeah, I find it meditative, and I find it infuriating sometimes and challenging, and I like the smell of the whiteout, dreadfully toxic, really toxic, and I like my hand doing this. But the new books are not just text. The new books juxtapose image that I've cut out of another book. It's I could never read them out loud because the text only makes sense, is only meant to make the sense I want it to make when you see the picture that goes with it. Yeah, picture, and this didn't incorporate any images, this book.
How did you think of this? Is this like something that lots of people do? And I just
no.
didn't know of
Tom
it?
Phillips, the great British 20th century British artist, sort of started this craze, I suppose, with his one of the great art works of the 20th century, Humament. You can buy it in paperback. Although he was treating a novel to be read again as a novel. So that's different than what I do. I don't, he was treating a novel so you could read pages and there'd be characters and stuff would happen. Some of my books erasure books are sequential. And there's an ongoing story loosely, and some aren't, yeah.
That's just fascinating.
Yeah.
And I was surprised how affecting they were to look at.
Yeah, and a lot of people hate them, which is, that's okay too.
Hateable.
Oh, I've talked to people who just, why do you waste your time doing that?
No.
Yeah, because it's fun and I love it. That's why.
I'm looking for... Would you mind ending with this poem?
Not at all. To be mined. Unable to actively love you for the rest of actuality, I will love in your stead as if they were you, the blue clouds beneath the wings of planes, wintered over faces ascending on an escalator, and nothing else. I will not love the trees, the rain, the stars, or dusk, the backs of coats or the shadows struck matches make in cupped palms. I will not love the sea or layers of cake, anything having to do with ink or horses, houses, or the moon. None of these things and nothing else shall I love, but blue clouds above the wings of planes and wintered over faces descending on an escalator, shall be sacred to me. The unchristened, unclarified, stunned ones, the disappearing, unpersonal ones, the ones who stop when they are behind and let the strange winds sweep through Sunday, April 4th, and never look where they are going. And the title of that poem is To Be Mimed. I don't know if I would title it that today, because that sort of turns it, I mean, can you imagine having to mime that? How would, we should try it. Unable to love you, it would be crazy.
It's a lovely poem, though.
To be mimed.
Very lovely. This has been an incredibly special experience for me. I really have loved talking about your work, and thank you so much for coming.
Thank you for having me. Your questions, you just nailed it right there. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank all of you.
Thank you.
And now we have a reception across the hall with artisanal cheese. Is that right?
Artisanal cheese?
Still have the artisanal cheese? This way. Oh, it's not in our usual place. It's at the end of this hall. Thank you so much for coming.
Thank you all for coming. You wonderful audience, and thank you so much.
Really.